Welcome back to Wisdom Teachings. I'm your host, David Wilcock, and I am super excited to be bringing you the last episode in this current season in which all of the things that I have been telling you are all going to come together so beautifully and give us the booster rocket that we need to really launch into the next phase of our discussion, where we're getting more away from theoretical concepts and directly into measurable scientific phenomena that are indisputable, that show us, in fact, that a remarkable change in matter, energy, and consciousness is happening right now in our solar system, and in fact is transforming the entire solar system as we know it. Last time I was talking to you about the Searle effect generator, which is one of the keys of a scientifically provable phenomenon that shows that anti-gravity really works. Poor Professor Searle was heavily ostracized by this. The government came after him. But one of the important things, if you remember, was that this tube torus of ionizing plasma appeared around the object once it started to achieve anti-gravity and begin to self-propel and self-accelerate. Remember, above a certain speed, it no longer needed to have power input. It would just run on its own. And this visible corona of plasma would appear around the object. Well, as it turns out, that's only one of a series of nested spheres of energy that would appear around this object. And that was not discovered except for Roshin and Godin, who I talked about last time, who replicated the effect in 2000. So what you're now seeing here, and I'm only going to show you a little bit of this because we went through it last time, is the visible proof of the Searle effect generator actually working. If you go right now, are these little rotors that look like this. This is now the Roshin and Godin replication, where you can see they have the ring there, and then they have the individual rollers, which once they get going, they really go fast. Now, as I said before, the skeptics used to say, oh, this is impossible, the Searle effect doesn't work, the whole idea is crazy, but now we have independent scientists building these things and getting it to work. Roshin and Godin did it right, and as you can see here, they actually built the rings and they had the whole platform bolted to the lab table. This is an actual photo of what it looked like. And in this case, they built it powerfully enough that they actually did get a levitating effect. Furthermore, at 200 revolutions per minute, it started to no longer need as much energy and become anti-gravity force, where it was noticeably reducing its weight. And at 550 revolutions per minute, no energy was required to run it. It was self-accelerating, which conventional physics would tell you is impossible. And my answer is, it appears to be just tapping into the pure energy of gravity as if it was a water wheel. And once it gets to a certain speed, that water wheel is just going to go on its own, and you no longer need any external energy input to make the thing run, which is totally amazing. So let's go through a few bullet points now. Here we go. These gravitational effects that were discovered showed that 50% of the pure weight of the device was eliminated as it got up to its magic speed. The clockwise motion of the rotors, which you saw there in the video, created an anti-gravitational force. And then if you did a counterclockwise motion, you got an increase in weight. That's a very strange phenomenon. The idea that the weight will actually go up. It will get heavier if you rotate it in the opposite direction. And that, to me, way back when I was first reading this years ago, showed me that there must be some kind of spin to gravity, and that if you work in the direction that gravity wants to spin, you're going to get one type of effect, and if you work against it, you're going to get another. So that was a very interesting data point. Let's go on. They also had, as the same thing that Searle discovered, a corona discharge of plasma that had a pinkish blue light emission, and it produced a noticeable ozone smell in the room. There was a toroidal cloud of ionizing radiation around the device, just like with Searle. And here's the really, really interesting part that's the focus of why I did this episode. It created measurable domain walls around the device. Now, what the heck is a domain wall? A domain wall, as we find out, a domain simply means an area. And a wall simply means a structure. So it's a structure that occupies a certain area. And they are toroidal structures. But the thing is, not all of these toroidal structures are visible to the naked eye in terms of plasma. It's possible that if you got it running with enough energy, that you would actually see multiple nested layers of plasma tori, or toruses. I'm not sure which way to pronounce it, but if you have these multiple toruses, they're not all going to fill with plasma, but there are other ways to detect that they exist, meaning that this device is creating energy fields that are actually nested together like layers of an onion. Now, does that sound familiar? Well, it should, because this is exactly what we have been seeing with the galaxy, any galaxy, and its energetic fields, as I was showing you, actually crashing into solar systems like ours. And when they do, we're getting stunning changes. And we saw already a very compelling scientific model, thanks to Dr. Harold Aston, the guy who was the head of patents for IBM in Europe, came up with this amazing model that demonstrates that the sun gets such a huge change in its energetic level that it gives off a big flash. That's his theoretical prediction, and it's mirrored in so many ancient traditions, and it's mirrored in the research from the secret space program. So all this stuff is lining up so beautifully. And now we're creating those same energetic structures in a lab with a machine. To me, this is tremendous, because it shows a unified physics that we can actually replicate in a laboratory setting. And remember, this is not some boring experiment. We're talking about anti-gravity and free energy. And this actually works. Let's keep reading. Here is the actual little illustration they made in their original paper of their device, and then the blue oval that you see around it is this toroidal energy cloud. And they have some more detail now on these so-called domain walls that they found. And this is where it gets really exciting to me, because it proves everything we've been talking about. One more effect, which was never reported previously, is the appearance of vertical magnetic walls surrounding the setup. So they do have a high magnetic charge. There was a zone of increased magnetic strength on the order of 0.05 Teslas. So it is measurable. Obviously, we're dealing with a little bitty machine here, not a huge star. And then even the center of a galaxy is much bigger than a star, right? So when we're talking about an emitter that has these properties where it can create free energy, stars are basically free energy. They say, oh, it's a fusion burning. Stars are basically free energy. They say, oh, it's a fusion burning star, but that's just an assumption. We don't know that's what it is. We know that they just go for a really long time. They don't run out of energy. So there very likely could be the same kind of phenomenon going on here. You're seeing the physics of the star appearing in a lab. So they're getting measurable magnetic energy, but that's not all. Let's keep reading. The structure of these magnetic zones resembles the pattern of circular waves on the water surface. We already saw that. Now here is their rough illustration of these walls. Notice that they are approximately similar in width from each other, but as you go out from the middle towards the edges, they get a little bit wider. That's an important point. And notice at the top that he's also showing you that the width of this is approximately 30 meters, which would be 90 feet. So this is big. This is a large structure. You have that machine, which, you know, you could put your hands on it like this. It's not that big. But 90 feet of walls, and those are just the ones they measured. Now, the idea that they're all vertical lines like that, I don't think is actually true. But that's just how they depicted it in this diagram. I do believe that the evidence will show that these are torus structures, toroidal in nature, that they are not just vertical lines. So that's an important distinction to make. So what the heck do these things do? Well, there's more to it than that. Besides just a magnetic charge, let's see what else happens. They say that there is no anomalous magnetic field that can be detected by a magnetometer when you're in any area between these walls. The layers of increased magnetic field strength are propagating with virtually no attenuation, meaning no loss of strength, to a distance of 15 decay at the boundary of this 15-meter radius area. So there's a really nice concentration of this stuff, and obviously if you build a bigger object, you're going to get much larger area of domain walls, or if it's got a lot more energetic charge in it. You might not even have to make it bigger, but if you can make it more powerful, then the walls would get even larger in size. Let's keep going. Each layer zone is 5 to 8 centimeters thick and exhibits a sharp boundary. This is a very important point. The layers are spaced about 50, 60 centimeters apart, and they slightly increase in distance from each other as you go away from the center. A stable pattern was also observed at a height of 5 meters above the setup, and the measurements were conducted in a second floor room above the laboratory. No tests were conducted on a still higher level. Okay, so this is important, right? 5 meters is not that high when you're dealing with something that's 30 meters across. So they're assuming that the walls are just going to go straight up. And again, everything that we've been talking about suggests that if they had done more research and they go a little higher, they would see those walls curling in and becoming a big sphere, a series of spheres all nested together. They just didn't go high enough to measure that. But there's still something else very strange about these walls that we haven't heard yet. Let's keep reading. Another interesting phenomenon consists in an anomalous temperature drop in the immediate vicinity of the converter. At a general room temperature level in the laboratory, plus 22, plus or minus 2 degrees Celsius, the temperature at the converter surface was 6 to 8 Celsius lower. Now this is also a very strange thing, because, and we can do this in another episode, there are Mother Shipton prophecies. Mother Shipton is a prophetess from England in the basically end of the Dark Ages, because, and we can do this in another episode, there are Mother Shipton prophecies. Mother Shipton is a prophetess from England in the basically end of the Dark Ages, beginning of the Renaissance period. And she had a lot of very strange prophecies that came true about our future, talking about people flying through the air, talking about roads, talking about cars. But then there's a very interesting line in there where she talks about people from outer space eventually coming when our world gets to this point, and that they land here, and that they can speak, they can walk, they can talk, and then it says that their ship is cold from its heat. And this, I'm getting chills just thinking about this right now. Cold from its heat. Now, here's a lady way before any type of modern UFO era or widespread knowledge of extraterrestrials, and yet she had this particular detail. And in fact, people who have done this research with the anti-gravity stuff do find a consistent temperature drop, suggesting in fact that the actual coherence of the area around that craft is increasing, because remember, heat is a lack of coherence. Heat is chaotic motion. But when you organize the motion, when you structure the area energetically, your temperature is going to go down, because now you're getting an actual organizing. You're getting a better geometric structured pattern of the energy itself, the gravitational energy, everything else. And we're going to see this again with Dr. Victor Schauberger, where he's watching these little rocks in a pond, and they bang around, and then they levitate to the surface, and as they do, they freeze and form this layer of ice across the top of the pond very suddenly. And that research is what led to, it's part of what led to the development of the German Bell craft that we've heard so much about on Cosmic Disclosure. So this is a very interesting phenomenon, but those temperature drops don't just happen near the walls of the actual device. They're going to be in the domain walls as well. Let's read that. Here we go. Similar temperature variations were detected in the vertical magnetic walls. Now that got me so excited, because now we're looking at something that totally defies the laws of physics as we know them. You have these sharp boundaries between these walls. They have a magnetic charge, and their temperature drops. What are we looking at here? We're looking at something unusual. We're looking at areas of charge, areas that actually have an energetic charge, and there's some sort of weird temperature modification. Well, what did I just say? It's more coherence. It's actually more organized. It's a higher energy. So if those same walls are moving through our galaxy and they crash into our solar system, we're actually getting a vibrational upgrade. We're actually getting higher energy. It's more organized. But the short-term effect is that it's going to, all that extra magnetic energy is actually going to excite the star and its planets, and that's where we get into our next season, where one of the main things that I'm going to start with is the interplanetary climate change phenomenon, a very fascinating, measurable proof of ascension. So these domain walls really got me excited. Let's keep reading. The temperature changes in the domain walls were detected by an ordinary alcohol thermometer with a reading set time of 1.5 minutes. The temperature variations in the magnetic walls are so striking that you can even feel them with your hands. If you put your hand inside the wall, you immediately notice that it's cold. That's how strong this phenomenon really is. It's literally something you can physically feel. The same pattern was observed at a height of 5 meters above the setup in a second-floor room above the laboratory, despite the fact that there were steel-reinforced concrete blocks separating these rooms. So these walls that you're seeing right here again, which they're depicting as if they were vertical, that temperature decrease caused by these domain walls is not affected by solid steel and concrete. It is some sort of weird energetic effect that is non-local. It just barges right through matter like it's not even there. So think about the fact that if we could replicate this Roshin and Godin domain wall effect and then circulate that cold in a refrigerator or in an air handler for the heating and cooling of your home, we've just solved half of the world's energy problems. And of course, wait a minute, free energy, you solve all the world's energy problems. But this is just another fringe benefit. And that's why it's so frustrating that these technologies have been suppressed. These guys get classified. If they do it in America, you're never even going to hear from them again. They typically get bribed or bought out. And then they're told to either take this money and become a multimillionaire or billionaire, or else nobody's ever going to hear from you again and you're going to be wearing concrete shoes, quote unquote. Let's read a little bit more about this because there's some fascinating stuff left to discover. They say here that, yep, there's no current explanation. These are very unusual results and they need a theoretical rationalization. That is true. Unfortunately, attempts at interpreting these results within the framework of existing physical theories of science showed that no one model can explain the whole set of experimental data. Well, that's obvious. So we're looking at something new, but here's the point. Skeptics online, if they ever even heard about this at all, and hardly anybody did, they would just poo-poo Roshin and Godin and say, oh, these guys don't know what the heck they're doing. But now we have multiple people showing you that, in fact, the Searle effect generator works, the rotors really spin. We can do more tests. We can continue to verify this effect because it is replicable. People are replicating this. So now what we need to do is get closer to what Roshin and Godin did and then use that to test out to see if you can put your hand in there and feel the cold. Why would these guys lie? Why would they go to all this trouble and to graph out their results and to talk about it in such technical detail? Scientists in Russia are not prone to do a lie. This is very likely, almost 100% certain to me, that this is in fact what they actually discovered, because it fits in so well with things that I was aware of, but they didn't have a model to explain it. And it all applies again to these huge boundary domain areas, these big spherical walls that are moving through galaxies, touching off suns as they hit them, and transforming DNA and consciousness, the scientific proof of ascension seen in a lab. Now let's keep going with our slides. So there it is. And again, this probably could be done without a whole lot of expenditure. We could replicate this effect. They did have to bolt it down, so it didn't take off. If a device this small can create noticeable anomalies, as I was saying, what about the power of a star or even a galaxy? So to round out this episode, I want to get into Dr. William Tift in more detail, because he himself did not just discover these weird areas of quantized redshift. he had a theoretical model that associated them with changes in time. We've been through all this stuff before. You know that he discovered redshift only occurs in these quantized intervals. And how does he explain them? He creates a model of three-dimensional time. The law of one talks about the physics of Dr. Dewey Larson. And remember now that the questioner of the law of one, Dr. Don Elkins, was a big Larson fanatic. He was all about the idea that, wait a minute, Einstein is trying to say time is one-dimensional? Nothing is one-dimensional. You don't have a one-dimensional reality. It is a totally silly mathematical abstraction that doesn't have any practical value. A three-dimensional space simply means that you use three axes to measure a volume. But it's not like you could just peel one of them out and then only have two or only have one. Yeah, you hear these things about, oh, the people in Flatland, or that a one-dimensional thing is just a line. There's no one-dimensional line in nature. It doesn't work that way. Even if time is a vector, right, the vector has to be moving in a corkscrew, which is three-dimensional. Because you're moving in a corkscrew, because the Earth rotates around its axis, it revolves around the sun, and the sun is revolving around the center of the galaxy. Thus, we're doing this. Time itself, if it's following us through the space-time medium, it has to be moving in 3D. Even the idea of a space-time medium. Remember, Einstein's trying to show you that like time is like a sheet of paper or a sheet of rubber, and that you put the planet in the middle and it dips down. It doesn't add up with how gravity moves into the planet from all directions at the same time. It has to be three-dimensional. There is no 2D, there is no 1D. That's just a mathematical bookkeeping error that they made. Tift was onto that. He didn't know about Larson, which is sad, but he comes up with this very robust model on his own of three-dimensional time, and is actually able to discover that in fact these zones of changing redshift, based on his math, completely separate from Dr. Harold Aston, who we were talking about before. Dr. Tift discovers that time changes dramatically as you go from one bubble to the next, which is so explanatory of ascension. Here's the heading of his paper. Let's take a look. Three-dimensional quantized time in cosmology. And again, this is way more geeky than we're really going to get into that deeply. W.G. Tift. And then he says here, starting from a model of 3D time in units of Planck's constant, Planck energy, it is possible to model the fundamental particles and forces. So he's starting with 3D time, and that's exactly what Dewey Larson does. He gets your basic quantum mechanics all worked out. He gets the forces worked out. He gets all kinds of strange phenomena in cosmology worked out. It's a truly incredible model. It is an absolute shame that science has not adopted Larson's cosmology. As the law of one says, that's as close as any of you all have gotten to figuring this big thing out. So we should take it seriously. Let's keep reading. Masses are now associated with a three-dimensional volume of time. So a piece of matter is literally a chunk of time. Forces are related to 4D space-time structures from which the fine structure constant can be derived. Let's just skip over that for right now. It's not that important. Fundamental particles may then be assembled into larger objects all the way up to galaxies, and you can satisfy relativity. So he's literally saying that a galaxy itself, just like individual particles, even though they're really not particles, a galaxy, ultimately all the matter in that galaxy is a structure of time. It is coalesced time. It is made by itself, just like individual particles, even though they're really not particles. A galaxy, ultimately all the matter in that galaxy is a structure of time. It is coalesced time. It is made by time. This is sounding just like what we heard from Dr. Nikolai Kozyrev, the Russian scientist who made so many breakthroughs we talked about earlier. And it's true. Three-dimensional time is the big secret. And in the second half of Source Field Investigations, the whole last 300 pages of the book are all about this. I went into great detail exploring this subject in that book. Way more than I'm doing right now. Let's keep reading. In summary, we have examined a model based upon two coexisting 3D spaces. One space that's made out of time, and one that is made out of what we normally think of space. Quantum physics resides in tau space, tau meaning time, And conventional dynamics operates in sigma space, sigma being the regular space that we normally associate with 3 dimensions. This is getting really interesting now. Although there as yet exists no formal mathematical framework linking these spaces, actually there does. He just didn't know about the work of Dr. Dewey Larson, which is sad. Although there is no formal mathematical framework linking them, there is a wealth of empirical consistency with actual observations. And this is the observations he made. It also includes properties ranging from the masses and forces at the fundamental particle level, meaning you can derive the masses and forces with time. Just use time as a 3-dimensional quantity. You don't have to mess with physics equations. You keep what you have that you know works. You just make time 3-dimensional, and all of a sudden all these goodies start popping out, like you can create mass, you can create force. Let's keep reading. Then you can also derive the redshift quantization as a factor of 3-dimensional time, and cosmic appears to be a promising subject for investigation. So this is stunning because, again, Tift did not know that Dr. Harold Aston, the head of patents for IBM in Europe, independently came up with a scientific model where he calculated with pencil and paper the theoretical values of the redshift quantized numbers before they actually showed up. Aston had it all worked out with equations. Then they look at galaxies, and sure enough, the numbers that he expected to see representing planes of existence actually measured out. But Tift doesn't know that Aston is saying those are planes of existence, literally meaning different levels of the ether. And now he's seeing, wait a minute, they also are levels of time. And I'm literally telling you that Tift's model implies very strongly that the entire way we experience and process time will change. Why is this significant? Because if you look at what Corey's been telling us on Cosmic Disclosure, extraterrestrials appear to be in a different time continuum. Their bodies run differently. They experience thousands of years. Go back and look at the interviews we did with William Tompkins. The typical Nordic ET is living 2,000 years, 5,000 years, maybe longer. Go back to the Sumerian king lists of the Anunnaki. These dreaded Draco, some of them may be even living for like 30,000 years. Now, does that make them super beings? No. What it implies, though, is that if we have, again, NASA's now saying 40 billion watery Earth-like planets just in our galaxy, there's going to be life all over the place, and it appears that life is being intelligently directed to create the hominid form. It works very well. There's all kinds of professors out there that are form. It works very well. There's all kinds of professors out there that are starting to talk about this. They call it convergent evolution. The same stuff works so well that it will keep happening again and again everywhere you go. We're dealing with a biological universe. Humans, or hominids at least, are the rule, not the exception. And when this wall hits you, your whole body evolves and your ability to process time changes. And this is described in the Law of One. That now, just as it says in the Bible, which is one of several esoteric sources that say this, 1 year becomes like 1,000 years. So you appear to live for 1,000 years of our time now, but you only perceive it as 1 year. Now we actually have the scientific proof of what it's being talked about in these sacred texts, describing how this actually works. Let's keep reading now. Tift goes on to say, at a given cosmic radius in tau space, a galaxy occupies a specific temporal or time state. This means that a galaxy must exist at a particular rate and flow of time in each zone. Just so you make sure that I'm not making this up and I'm not putting words in his mouth, he actually said this, and it's right there. It must change that temporal state in discrete steps. Discrete means separate and distinct and unique. So time changes not gradually, a sudden flash. And the Law of One also explains that higher dimensional beings have lifespans of millions of years, and this allows them to be able to direct the evolution of entire worlds, because when they do that, they can actually see the progress of a civilization. over what would appear to be a very long time, where people have so many different lifetimes, all over the course of what seems to them to be, ancient. A little bit more about this quantized time to jumpstart our next season, where we're going to get into interplanetary climate change, because as we go into this new zone of time and energy, where time itself changes, there is a massive energetic charge up in our solar system, and all of the geometry that I've been talking to you about, that we've seen at the subatomic level, that we've seen in the original photon of the universe, that we've seen in super galaxies and in galaxies, now finally you're going to see it working in planets. The same stuff, a unified science. All that and more coming up in future episodes in our next season of Wisdom Teachings. I'm your host, David Wilcock, and I thank you for watching.